Welcome to Griefline, Saurabh Mishra.
Thank you, Marianne. Pleasure to be here.
Great. I've just finished reading your book, My Wednesdays, From Death to Life. And I have to say it's a very enjoyable read and quite funny, which is a bit strange given the context. But I understand from this that you've been spending 17 years supporting people through the dying process as a volunteer in a hospice in palliative care. And before we get onto that, I just want to say that here at Griefline, all of us who work here and all our volunteers, we spend a lot of time thinking about self-care. What can we do to support ourselves so that we can be present for people? But and you speak about that, but you use the expression a circle day, and I've not heard that before. Can you sort of explain a little bit what is a circle day and how does that help us refill our cup?
Sure, thanks, Marianne. So my Wednesdays, as you pointed out, are my circle days. It's a nice point halfway between the working week, to take a day off, which is what I do and have been doing for 17 years now. Through a fairly busy corporate entrepreneurial career, being involved with small and large businesses, and yet every Wednesday saying, you're not going to see me, I'm off doing something else. And that something else really is about the reason for the circle. The title circle is what goes around comes around. And I think the idea is really to be sowing seeds of a particular kind all through that day that really bloom and flourish in the immediate future. And the seeds that I'm referring to are, for example, spending a lot of time in meditation, spending long hours of meditation, which also includes music. I have an Indian classical music background. I'm a vocalist, and I've been learning for many decades, actually. So a good intensive practice of that is also meditative. So all of that combines into that one day. But also, as you said, really a lot of volunteering activity, a lot of giving back. One of which is through the palliative care agency. But there are also others. So the music that I mentioned, I sit on the board of an organization that promotes that Indian classical music in Australia. So a lot of activities for that, and also an organization that actually helps entrepreneurs with mentoring and sometimes funding and connections. So also essentially mentoring entrepreneurs. So that's kind of rounds off my Wednesdays. So it's a day spent in contemplation, in meditation, and really giving back. And I find that it kind of gives back to me in abundance. It gives me, I think I find some of my best business ideas come in the immediate aftermath of that Wednesday. Watch out for me on the Thursday in the office. And but also I think there's a lot of happiness, a lot of joy that comes from giving back.
Absolutely. And that's wonderful. So could you tell us a little bit more about the volunteering in palliative care? What do you actually do?
Sure. I've trained for two different kinds of roles with this particular agency. So the first role that I trained for, that I still do, is really a companionship role. And I think the real common thread in all of that is to be able to be present and have conversations with the client. So the agency refers to the patient as it were, as a client. And in that role, through the years, I've done everything from taking the client out for a coffee to just if they're in that at that place in their journey where they really aren't not even conscious for that matter, then I just go and sit there by the bedside, and typically I might meditate myself during that time, and I find that that's a very special thing to be able to do as well. So, and anything from in between, going for a walk, taking them out for a shopping chore. So whatever it is that in fact, I had a young boy who was in a wheelchair, so I used to take him out to play wheelchair basketball. So really, whatever works for the client, that's what I do. The second role is a biography role. It's a very interesting project that this particular organization has done. I think the volunteers for this organization have probably put together 2,000 biographies by now. I think I've done about 7 or 8 myself. And yeah, that's a very special experience as well, of sitting and listening to someone recount their life, and then going back and kind of putting it into a coherent, piece with photographs and with background research and so on. It ends up being a fairly good production. But I think it's the exercise of reminiscing and contemplating on their life that is actually the key part of that offering. So those are the 2 roles that I do with this agency.
I have heard there's that making meaning of your life. What was it all for? What was the purpose of my life? If you can make meaning of your life and you do have a sense of purpose, that can really help you let go of your regrets of the things that you left undone or things that you have done that you wished you hadn't. And that can help you go towards a good death. And I've heard that, but I just wondered, from your experience of sitting with people when they make their biography, their autobiography, and they look back over their life, do you think that is an important part of having a good death?
Yeah, I think I think if you think about the Tibetan tradition, they talk about the point of death as being the most important point in life. In their thinking, it's the point at which you can free yourself forever from the cycle of births and deaths. So they spend their entire life preparing for that point of death. So I think there's much to be said about a good death. Mary, I can't speak for anyone else, but in my own thinking, for me, a good death would be a death with awareness. That would be a blessing, because I think there's a lot to be said about that, and there's I think there's a degree of being quite fortunate in being able to do that, being able to have a death that's with awareness. Mind you, Marianne, there's another kind of death, which is very conscious, death with consciousness, I suppose, and active consciousness. It's probably a paradigm removed from what we are all mostly familiar with. But you always hear about the stories about yogis. I've met yogis who have gone on to kind of preempt and announce that on such day I will be leaving my body, and on that day, that appointed hour, in a very public way, they sit there in lotus posture, close their eyes, and they've gone. Imagine what that means for the human potential when it comes to death. So there's much to be, I think, contemplated on what is a good death.
I think, without being a yogi, I think a lot of families have the experience that the person who's dying has some element of choice in it. They will sometimes hold on, even though the doctors are saying this person is going to die in the next 24 hours. In fact, they will hold on because they're waiting for maybe a family member to get back from overseas, and they wait until they can say goodbye, and then they choose. So there does seem an element of choice, even in more pedestrian, the rest of us, not the yogis.
Well, there's also the idea of deathbed phenomena, which is, probably what you're describing also speaks to that, where, you have someone who is dying, whose body is kind of, deteriorating on any aspect. And yet, at that, just before the point of death, there is suddenly an upspurt in energy, an upspurt in almost like, in acuity and awareness. And yeah, it's like that candle that burns bright before it flickers off. And it's almost like, yeah, it's a blessing, it's a moment, it's your gift to basically be able to say goodbye. So I think, there is that's also an aspect of a good death, I think, to be able to say to loved ones, look, thank you very much, and express your gratitude. I think to die with a light heart is also a very important thing.
So deathbed phenomena, is that a well-known thing? Is that just something that you've seen, or is that a well-documented aspect in pal care?
It's a brilliant question. The fact is, Marianne, look, I know Griefline is a very scientific organization. I'm also I come from a background of engineering and physics and maths, and I like to see the world and trying to explain the world with physics and maths. I think honestly, you've got to be able to, like, there's no such thing as out of the ordinary or miraculous phenomena. And as far as I'm concerned, every phenomena should be able to be explained with physics.
Mm.
What we do have probably a situation is that we don't know enough physics to be able to explain some phenomena. I think that's any open-minded scientist should accept that premise. And with the acceptance of that premise, let's talk about deathbed phenomena. So I mentioned one of them. There are others that I have experienced myself. And the most comprehensive research that I've seen on this topic was a master's thesis presentation at a conference where a nurse in the UK had actually gone and interviewed 200 workers in palliative care, so doctors and nurses, and asked them the simple question, what sort of deathbed phenomena have you experienced? And, shockingly, every single one of them had experienced not just one, but multiple phenomena. And there's just no framework to talk about it. So now what are those phenomena? This researcher had then, I think, quite usefully gone and cataloged those phenomena. And one of them, the first one, was exactly what we just talked about, which is that inexplicable sudden upsurge in energy and acuity. There's another one where you'll see the dying person often talking to an invisible entity or many entities. And it's a very, it's a very surreal kind of experience. But when that happens and you ask the dying person, they'll say, yeah, it's my mom. It's someone it's a loved one, a friend, a relative, a parent, someone who has passed away before, and who seemingly is there to kind of help them transition. I mean, what a wonderful idea. Um, One of our biggest fears in our society is the fear of dying alone. This suggests to you that there is no dying alone, that your loved ones from this life will be there to see you through. And that's such an amazing idea.
I
Um,
can't tell you how comforting that is. I
mm,
think what we see with our grieving population, especially I think quite often when a person is a carer and they do want to spend as much time as possible with the person who's dying, and they specifically want to keep vigil
mm,
and be there and sacrifice their own time to sit with whoever's dying, and they want to be there at the moment of death.
mm,
And quite often, like significantly very often, it's the one time that they leave the room because they just have to pop to the shops or they have an appointment or whatever. And when they're absent,
mm,
that seems to be when the person dies. And it's very distressing. And one of the things you're left with is, oh my goodness, they died alone.
mm,
And that can sit very heavily on your heart. So the idea that they didn't die alone, that
mm,
probably that there were people that came to get
mm,
them, I
mm.
think it's very comforting. And I'm not sure, can you speak to why that might why if a person has a choice of when to die,
Mm.
why do they die when their carer is
Not
absent,
there.
do you think?
As hard as it might be for a carer to hear it, but sometimes the carer is the attachment that the carer has is keeping that person there, well past the point that they should be there. So that's, I think, you know, embracing the idea of impermanence, embracing the idea of, the inevitability of a death, I think includes the idea of letting go. Um, so oftentimes, I think we'll just be so, I mean, it's our willpower, right? It's
Mhm.
our willpower that's kind of keeping them there. And when we're not there, like, okay, finally I can leave. Um,
It's really I remember in your book reading as well, there's something about letting go and something about surrendering. And there's that feels as though there's a moment of surrender when you die. Is that right?
Yeah, look, Marianne, I mean, it really depends on, how much you want to subscribe to some of the frameworks that do exist about I mean, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, talks in incredible detail about the bardo of life, the bardo of dying, the bardo of, post-death, and the bardo of pre-life. Obviously reincarnation is a big idea in that tradition. And it's almost as if people, they're wise sort of practitioners have gone into each state, experienced it, and come back and described it. So, death is a process. There's no question about that. I mean, I think we physiologically also agree. Everybody agrees death is a process. There's no one point at which you say, okay, that's, this is the point. So in the same way, I think if you look at the considerable literature that comes from, yogic traditions, Tibetan traditions, Buddhist traditions, particularly. And I think I would say every tradition, because it's a human experience, it's a common human experience. Then yeah, that point of death is certainly a point of surrender, a point of release, and to be able to do so with, I think, optimism, with the idea that whatever comes next is at least an adventure. Um, either we're all wrong and there's nothing, in which case nothing to worry about, or it'll be a grand adventure. So, so to approach it from that perspective, I think is also, I think, again, goes to that definition of a good death.
So sitting with death weekly has taken away any fear that you might have of dying. It's not something to be afraid of.
No. I think, I mean, again, my own experience of these last 17 years of seeing, very many people that I've known, got to know, and then they've died. As well as, again, going back to the testimony of some of the greatest minds of in our history, in human history, who have talked about this idea, talked about this particular matter, has told you there's nothing to fear, absolutely nothing to fear. And in fact, if anything, it almost the narrative is almost that this, what we have going on here, is the penance. This is the there's a lovely couplet in Urdu which translates as, there's no bigger sentence, there's no bigger punishment than life, only that we don't know what we did to deserve it. We don't know what the crime was. So there's this idea that this is the penance, and that wherever we go to after this is actually our home. So what's there to fear about going home?
Saurabh Mishra, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.